Oh, there are so many yummy vegetarian options out there. You could try like lentil soup, veggie burgers, tofu stir fry. The possibilities are endless.
Hello. Have you ever wondered if you might have to pay back some of your government benefits? It's a question that trips up a lot of Canadians, especially when their income starts to climb. Today, we're going to demystify a really key part of our tax system, social benefit repayments, or what most people just call clawbacks. We're going to focus specifically on how this affects employment insurance and old age security. And I promise, by the end of this, you'll have a crystal clear understanding of how it all works.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with why these rules exist in the first place, the policy problem they're trying to solve. Then we'll get into the mechanics of how it works in the tax system. After that, we'll do a deep dive into the specific calculations for both EI and OAS, walk through a detailed case study to see how they interact, and then wrap it all up with the key takeaways you need to remember.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Why do we even have clawbacks? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental tension in public policy: how to offer universal benefits but still target the recovery.
It seems a bit odd, doesn't it? A universal benefit that you might have to give back. But here's the thinking behind it. While programs like old age security are universal in their application, meaning everyone who's eligible can get it, the government wants the net effect to be targeted. Clawbacks are the tool they use to do this. It's a way of saying, yes, this program is for everyone, but we're going to recover some of it from those who are financially well off to ensure the support primarily goes to those who need it most. It's a balance between universality and fiscal responsibility.
So let's put a formal definition on it. A clawback is simply a rule that says if your net income for the year crosses a certain line, you're required to repay some of the EI or OAS benefits you received. You can think of it as a rebalancing mechanism. The program is universal on the front end, but the clawback makes sure the final distribution of those funds is more targeted to lower and middle income Canadians on the back end.
Okay, so how does this actually show up on your tax return? Well, it's a very specific two-step process, and it's designed this way to be completely fair from a tax perspective. Now, this is a point that often trips people up, but it makes perfect sense when you break it down. First, you have to report and include the entire amount of EI or OAS you received during the year as part of your income. But then, and this is the critical second step, you get to claim a deduction for the exact amount you have to repay. Why is this so important? Well, it means you don't end up paying income tax on money that the government is essentially taking back. It ensures you're only ever taxed on the benefits you actually get to keep in your pocket. This isn't just a courtesy. It's written right into the Income Tax Act to make sure the system is fair.
All right, theory's over. Let's get into the practical application, starting with our first example, the employment insurance repayment. Okay, if you're taking notes, here's the first magic number you need to know for 2025. $82,125. This is the income threshold for the EI clawback. If your net income is under this amount, you can breathe easy, none of this applies to you. But the moment you go over it, the repayment calculation kicks in. This number is the starting line. So, how do you figure out the exact repayment amount? It's a two-part calculation called a lesser of test. Here's how it works. First, you calculate 30% of the total EI benefits you received. Let's call that calculation A. Then for calculation B, you figure out how much your income is over that $82,000 threshold, and you calculate 30% of that excess amount. Your required repayment is simply the smaller of those two numbers, A or B. This is a really important feature because it creates a ceiling. You'll never be asked to repay more than 30% of your benefits, and you'll never have to repay more than 30% of the income you earned above the line.
Okay, so you've got the EI clawback figured out. Now let's add another layer to this, the old age security, or OAS, repayment. This one has its own rules, its own threshold, and its own rate. And for 2025, that income threshold is quite a bit higher. It's $93,454. So it's entirely possible to have an income high enough to trigger an EI clawback, but still be below the threshold for repaying any OAS.
Now, if there is one thing, one single thing you take away from our time together today, please let it be this. The order of operations here is absolutely positively critical. You must calculate and determine your EI repayment first. Why? Because the amount you have to repay for EI is then subtracted from your income before you even begin the OAS calculation. This isn't a suggestion, it's a hard rule in the tax code, and it can make a massive difference in how much OAS, if any, you have to pay back. Think of it like a set of dominoes. The EI calculation has to fall first. The OAS calculation is another lesser of test, just like EI, but with two key differences. First, the rate is lower. It's 15%, not 30%. Second, and this is where that crucial ordering rule comes into play, you're not using your total income. You're using your adjusted net income. That is, your income after you've subtracted the EI repayment. So you compare your total OAS benefits received against 15% of your adjusted income over that $93,000 threshold. And again, your repayment is whichever of those two figures is smaller.
All right, we've covered a lot of rules, rates, and thresholds. The best way to really make this stick is to see it all come together. So let's walk through a comprehensive case study to see exactly how these two clawbacks interact in a real-world scenario.
Let's meet Miss Marilyn Jacoby. She's 68 years old, and in 2025, she has a mix of income sources. She has employment income, but she also received both EI and OAS benefits during the year. Her situation is the perfect example to see all these rules in action.
So here are her financials. She earned $80,000 from her job, got $10,000 in EI, and $8,750 in OAS. If we add all that up, her initial total income before we think about any clawbacks is $98,750. Okay, let's apply the rules. First up, we have to calculate the EI repayment. We run our lesser of test. Calculation A is 30% of her $10,000 in EI benefits, which is a nice, clean $3,000. For calculation B, we take her total income, subtract the EI threshold, and take 30% of that remainder, which gives us $4,988. So we compare the $3,000 to the $4,988. The lesser of the two is $3,000, so that's her EI repayment. Easy enough?
And here is where we see that critical sequencing rule pay off. Before we even look at the OAS calculation, we must adjust her income. We take her starting income of $98,750 and we subtract that $3,000 EI repayment. Her new adjusted income for this calculation is now $95,750. Now we can run the OAS test. When we take 15% of her income over the OAS threshold, the result is only $344. We compare that to her total OAS benefits of over $8,000. The smaller number is clearly $344. Had we forgotten to deduct the EI repayment first, her OAS clawback would have been much, much higher. That one step makes all the difference. And this brings it all together beautifully. We start with her total income, we deduct the $3,000 EI repayment, and then we deduct the $344 OAS repayment. This lands Ms. Jacoby at a final net income for tax purposes of $95,406 for 2025. The step-by-step process gets us right to the correct answer.
Okay, let's just take a moment to pull back and consolidate the key principles we've seen in action here. These are really the core concepts you need to have down.
So, to recap, 1. Clawbacks are all about targeted recovery from high-income earners. 2. The repayments are always deductible, which is crucial for tax fairness. 3. EI and OAS are separate beasts. They have their own unique thresholds and their own repayment rates. 4, and I'll say it one last time, the EI repayment must always be calculated first. And 5, the way these two rules interact can have a really significant impact on your final net income. So we've gone through the mechanics of how these clawbacks work. But understanding the how really just leads us to a much bigger, more practical question: so what? For anyone who's approaching retirement or managing multiple streams of income, these rules are not just an academic exercise. They can mean thousands of dollars in benefits kept or lost. Which leads me to a final question I'll leave with you to think about. Given these complex, interlocking rules, at what point in your financial life does proactively planning for clawback exposure go from being a smart idea to an absolute necessity? Thank you for your time.